In this section, we'll be looking at right to work checks. So we'll be looking at a reminder of how you are supposed to complete a right to work check and why it is important. We'll be looking at some of the changes that have been implemented in the last year in terms of being able to use online right to work checks. And finally, we will be looking at right to work checks in respect of EU nationals and what changes, if any, you are supposed to be making in respect of those people. All employers have a duty to ensure that they are not employing illegal workers, so preventing illegal working. And as you know, if you fail to complete a right to work check correctly, there are severe penalties that can be imposed. So civil penalties, which can be up to £20,000 per illegal worker, and criminal penalties as well, if you are knowingly employing someone who does not have the right to work here. However, if you complete your right to work check correctly, you will establish a statutory excuse against that liability, which is why it's so important to get it right. And it's important that you complete that check before the person starts their employment. The government issues guidance on how to complete right to work checks, so it has detailed policy guidance, and that is freely available to all employers online. And there is an annex in that policy which lists List A documents and List B documents. So provided that you are getting one of the documents that is on that list, then you can use that for the purpose of the right to work check. So List A documents are documents that mean the person who is giving you them has the permanent right to work in the UK. So for example, a British passport. List B documents are documents where the person has a time-limited right to work in the UK. So you would establish a statutory excuse, but only until that document expires. And then you would need to complete a fresh right to work check to see if that person still has the right to work in the UK. So what is the three-step process? So first you need to obtain the document, and that needs to be in its original physical format, so the physical passport. You then need to check that document in the presence of the individual. So that's either in their physical presence, or you could do it, for example, via Skype or a video link, but you would still need to have the original document in front of you. So when you're checking that document, what are you looking for? You need to look to check that the photograph is consistent with the person in front of you. You need to check that the date of birth is consistent with the person in front of you. You also need to look and see if the document is in date, so it's not expired. And importantly, particularly where it's a List B document, you need to check whether there are any restrictions on the work that the person can do for you. So one of the areas that this is key is where you've got, for example, a student who is on a Tier 4 visa. So they can often work, but they can only work for a certain number of hours each week. So you must make sure that if you are employing someone who has that type of visa, you are not making them work over the hours that they're allowed to work in accordance with their visa. And then finally, you need to make a copy of the document, and you need to say on that copy that you have completed a right to work check. So it's not enough to just date the document. You should instead say, I completed a right to work check on X date, and then retain a secure record of that. You can retain the record electronically, but make sure that you have the information and the date that you actually completed the check. So we've already talked about why it's important to get it right in the context of criminal and civil penalties. However, it's also important to get it right because if you are a sponsor licence holder and you do not complete right to work checks correctly and then, for example, have a civil penalty issued against you, then it's likely that your sponsor licence will be revoked, and that will mean that you can't sponsor migrants using that sponsor licence. It also means that if you are looking to apply for a sponsor licence in the future, then it's unlikely that you will get that approved. So that's obviously very important in the context of what we've been talking about in the different sections in terms of employers now needing to have a sponsor licence if they want to employ anyone who is not in the settled workforce. So there were some changes in January of last year to the right to work check regime, which means that in some circumstances you now can carry out a right to work check online. But you can only do that in terms of certain documents. So the key one is a biometric residence permit. You also must get the agreement of the employee to do the check online, and they do not have to agree to it, in which case you would go back to the original way of checking in physical hard copy. So how does that three-step process work in respect of online right to work checks? So first of all, you would need to use the online checking service. So you would get a share code from the employee once they've already accessed their right to work online. and then you would need to input that into the employer's system. That would then generate the information about the particular employee, and it should have the photograph there, the information about their nationality, and any restrictions on their right to work in the UK. So the second step is checking that information, much as you would have done if you were doing it with the physical copy, and making sure that the photograph is the same as the person who is turning up to work. The third step is then to retain a copy of that check. So even though you've done it online, you still should retain a copy of that information. So either print it out or print screen it and then retain it securely, stating the date on which you did the check. So finally, what do we do about checking EU nationals' right to work? So as it currently stands, you can still accept an EU passport or national identity card, and that is still listed as a List A document, which means that on the face of it, they have the permanent right to work in the UK, and you will establish a continuous statutory excuse. So the government has indicated that this will remain the case until the 30th of June 2021, which is obviously the date on which the settled status scheme is open for EU nationals to apply to. So there is a period between January of next year and June of next year where, in theory, an employee from the EU could come to the UK without having settled status, and you could actually be in a position where you're needing to accept their passport as their evidence of their right to work. So it's not quite clear what, if anything, the government is going to do about this strange 6-month period in which you, on the face of it, would still need to accept their passport, but in reality they would need to have already applied for settled status or pre-settled status. So it's very important that until we get new guidance on the right to work checks from the government, you do not do anything differently in respect of EU nationals. So you should still be accepting the passport or the national identity card as the List A document from new EU nationals who are coming to work for you. And also in respect of existing employees, you shouldn't be conducting a follow-up check on them. So even if they've applied under the settled status scheme, you can't actually ask them for that evidence of their settled status because you've got no legal basis on which to complete a follow-up check. If they give you that information, then that's fine, you can retain it on your records, but make sure that you don't ask them for it because it could result in discrimination claims. So in summary, there's going to be lots of changes coming up, and we will expect new guidance in terms of right to work checks in due course. So how then do employers prepare for this? So we'll be looking next at how you can prepare for all of these changes.